Before I start, I just wanted to say, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Namaskar, Mandri. Welcome to this first inaugural talk, and I'm very feel fortunate. To be really, part of this inaugural conversation, that we'll have many of these conversations that Anita has shared with us, which are coming in next few weeks and months. There are many more planned at this point, right? Along with me, there are a few other experts also who are with me. So, before I start talking about today's agenda, I just want to make sure you guys are aware that there are many of our experts who are participating right now or who will be participating in future events. And we very much welcome the collaboration and innovation together in this particular group. So some of the key folks who are participating today are Bhushan Bonde from UK, so who is leading a technology innovation organization to build really drug discovery space. We also have Dr. Udayan Apte, who is a professor at the University of Kansas. His focus has been on studying the toxicity and liver diseases, who is also going to be speaker in a couple of weeks from now. We also have Neelam Vaidya. She's based out of the Bay Area, who's also an expert in developing platform and data to provide solutions for not only the pharma industry, but pretty much everywhere the chemicals are used in terms of the toxicity. So all of these folks will participate at the right point in the conversation, and we bring this as part of the forum. With that, let me go to the agenda. So today's agenda is really focused around 4 different topics. How do we go about drug selection by using some of the advanced techniques in AI/ML world? After selection of a drug, how do we really use AI-assisted technologies to accelerate the innovation in terms of the development cycles, and how can we make it quicker to take these medicines to the market quickly? The third area that we're going to cover is part of the roadmap and building the AI/ML capabilities within the organization. So this is easier said than done, but I will also share some of my experience on how I've seen organization are done and what advices we provided based on the experience that with various pharma and biotech clients that I worked in the past. Lastly, there's a tremendous amount of interest in this topic globally. And I just wanted to make sure we share some of the key challenges. And I'm trying to keep this particular webinar at a common understanding level. And there can be a deeper conversation within the smaller groups as part of the Innovation Academy down the line. And there are experts who are participating right now in the technology world, AI world, as well as pharma world, who are also really trying to understand for the first time. So, let's get to the topic at the core. But before I get to the topic at the core, I just wanted to also bring some background in terms of why this topic is important and why people are thinking about the complexity around that topic. So I just wanted to take a moment to allow you to see what do you really see a similarity between these images. And I'll probably talk about a few hints where you'll see there is a lot of complexity, there's a lot of risk, and there's a tremendous amount of cost involved, and the amount of time that is needed to launch what you see on the screen are at equal scale. And hence, when there's a complexity and risk involved, there's a lot of groundwork needed, and a lot of this groundwork is driven out of data. And hence, we'll try to understand that how AI in this particular case is going to play a big role moving forward. Why complexity? So I just want to share with you some numbers. In any human body, there are 40 trillion cells, and each of the cells have 1 trillion molecules. And each of those molecules are going through hundreds and if not thousands of reactions through multiple metabolic pathways. Hence, it's incredibly complex human body. And when you introduce a medicine, it has to be safe, it has to be effective. And we know that when there is a complexity in terms of the metabolic pathways, and this is just to prove my point a little bit further. There are metabolic pathways which are very specific by their own functions, and also there are multiple cellular and molecular processes under each of those metabolic pathways, which are even more complex. So the ability of any cell to perceive or correctly respond to these microenvironments is the basis under which there's a development of any of the protein or a tissue repair or immunity is defined. Errors in any of these signaling or interactions really cause the diseases, and they can vary from cancer, autoimmunity, all the way to diabetes. And hence, there's a tremendous amount of hope that computers and biology can come together to solve this complexity. Now, let's talk about what are the important aspects when you introduce a medicine for needy patients. And when a therapeutic area is targeted for any of the drugs, the goal is to really develop a treatment or a cure which is safe, effective, and timely. So one of the best examples of timely development is, recent days, is COVID-19 vaccine. While drug absolutely isn't, needs to be safe, but you also will acknowledge that there are millions of patients who are needing life-saving treatment within a reasonable time. And now that we understood the complexity of the human body and the delivery of medicine, so let's briefly talk about how AI and ML can really help us in this particular drive. I just want to share some of the latest news, and this is just in last 90 days or so. And that is, towards the end of the last year, there was a huge news, and some people probably didn't even notice, but Google announced through its DeepMind subsidiary that they made a huge leap in solving a protein structure problem using AI. Why that is important is this was one of the most complex problems that Google thought is for them to solve, other than all the world problems they pretty much solved so far, right? So that means the biology and the chemistry problems are going to get a lot of time to solve. Another news, I'm sure a lot of us got Moderna or Pfizer vaccine in the US, but why Moderna was one of the first ones to really introduce the COVID-19 vaccine is they have invested heavily in their AI platforms and how their processes were really enabling their AI engines, and as well as the true innovation in terms of building the mRNA-based molecule with the right instructions, going through multiple layers and instructing your body to fight COVID-19. So it's just amazing. One other thing I just wanted to show you, and this is as of yesterday. You'll see the date on April 9th. And this I found, this to be a little bit funny as well, saying AI and biology poised to scratch each other's back. This is one of the funniest ones, and really true statements I heard in recent days. I will in fact extend it by saying AI will not only stop there, but extend its other arm, scratching chemistry's head as well. So it's all about chemistry and biology, solve the problems getting solved with AI, and that's been a really creating a hope for better health across the world. So let's talk very specifically about drug discovery and development processes and how the AI techniques can help expedite this process. A lot of you guys are from the pharma industry. Some of you may not be. So I just put a very high level value chain description out here, starting with discovery, development, and there's a lot of clinical trials and studies, animal studies, human trials, and before scale up and manufacturing and the marketing and distribution takes over. So in this particular webinar, we are only focused on discovery and development, and there are many use cases that we found based on our experience, which gonna really make bring a drug to a market or a treatment to the market in other areas of the value chain, and we will talk that in probably in some time in future. But right now we can just focus on discovery and development side of the house. Further digging deeper into the discovery steps. So I kind of broken this discovery into 3 different steps, just for at high level. Once the first step is really identification of disease causing factors at very molecular level. And this is a very important step. This fairly complex task, as I already kind of alluded earlier, the human body is very difficult to understand and interpret in terms of how it's going to react to an external drug or medicine or any of the treatment that you're going to pursue further. Assuming this task is complete, the protein causing the disease is identified. But how do you neutralize such a source? And how do you turn on and off codons, which may be responsible for producing this protein? Or how do you identify the metabolic irregularities, which may be caused by external toxins or external factors? And all of that is an important part of the conversation. And hence, understanding the protein structure and its potential interactions with each other and what Google has published is extremely important. I think it's going to go a long way. And a lot of cutting edge biotechs are going to start utilizing that a few years from now. Even though the innovation happens, but it takes tremendous amount of time to utilize that innovation in reality. What I'll do is, these are some of the steps, but let's talk about what AI/ML brings in this particular case to solve these particular discovery challenges. So I kind of listed very few of those. Honestly, there are many, many other solutions industry is pursuing. But this might give you an idea. Natural language processing is playing a key role in really collecting and analyzing the literature. You know that this industry is very IP or IP driven, intellectual property driven, and patents and processes are extremely important. So collecting that information and the latest research in either from the university side as well as the collaborations that happen within the industry are very important. After the identification, the protein-protein interactions using different techniques is playing a huge role. Where there's something called de novo techniques to really get a better understanding of properties of molecules that you're pursuing in terms of just not the safety, but how it's going to interact as part of the development process is equally important. Maybe I'll spend a little bit more time in terms of talking about some of the work we have done in antibody modeling and design. And a lot of people are probably getting more and more familiar with antibody, but I'll also touch upon very quickly some basics of antibody before we get into those details. And lastly, there are tools and techniques which are important to simulate how a particular disease is going to take a particular pathway, or a particular drug is going to follow a particular pathway, and any of the positive or negative impacts, without going through true experimental process and talk about true in silico techniques if possible. Okay. So I'm going to kind of just talk about one specific example, just to kind of show how natural language processing and other techniques can come together in the first understanding of what exists in this particular world. So I picked an example of Alzheimer. Alzheimer is one of the most costliest diseases in the world. It takes tremendous amount of dollars to support folks who are going through this real challenging disease. So let me kind of talk about and kind of give you a true example how discussion of information at single place where biologists and scientists can make tremendous decisions and effective decisions to bring these treatments and cures early for our patients. Many of these techniques have been, used in the past in a lot of other commercial places, but it also needs a very specific understanding of a scientific context to make sure we present the right information in front of our biologists and scientists. So Alzheimer is really caused by, at least at the current point, understanding is by two possible proteins called beta amyloids and tau proteins. I just picked an example of beta amyloids. So when you start talking about how do I know the most recent trends and information of beta amyloids, can I look at various available images of beta amyloids through the scans that are available for the patients who currently are suffering through this disease? Can I look at and assess what hippocampal assessment is? Also, we know that there are very specific impact of toxins and oligomers, but there are also some positive antibodies who have shown that they can neutralize these toxins. So example being PM310 is an antibody that binds to the neurotoxic amyloid beta aggregates, which is the real reason for which some of the Alzheimer or some of the early indications of Alzheimer's are being detected. And they really prevent this formation of beta amyloids. Then we talk about what is that tramiprosate. Prosate is an anti-amyloid therapy as well. What do I know about that? So this is found naturally in seaweed. So if you don't remember any of the things from this webinar, one thing I just want you guys to take away is, eating seaweeds is going to help you from the long term. I tend to forget a lot of stuff. I'm sure we are all going through this multitasking world where we're feeling that we're going to miss. So, kind of moving on, there are many of these research papers and information that can be brought together. I want to show you guys a quick example of how we kind of done this in the past. And just for the Garje Marathi members, we created a URL, and this URL will be available on our Garje Marathi website for consumption. So I may have to share my screen. Give me just a second.
Yeah, Sachin?
Yes. Yes, Anand.
Yeah, okay, carry on. Okay.
Okay. Hope you're able to see my screen. Okay, thank you. So, so this is a completely AI-driven COVID hub that we built based on, there was a tremendous amount of need to collect all the possible research, clinical trials data, and various activities that are happening in the world. So the information really was flowing at a pace that no human being with hundreds and thousands of people available in any organization are able to manage this. So this is a good example of how AI and ML and many of these techniques have come together to show different clinical trials, different researches that's happening in this COVID world. For example, if I'm going to start looking at Pfizer as an organization, which people have been using in terms of their research, what you'll find is we have completely automatically collected this set of information for various research that is done by Pfizer across the world beyond the COVID as well. And in this particular case, you will find that where this particular drug stand in terms of that pool. What are the different potential drugs that are coming up from them, as well as where they reside in terms of the approval process. How many research papers associated to that particular information is collected. Lastly, you will be able to see by each of the treatment areas, whether it's a vaccine or antiviral or antibody treatments across different options in the world. So when you look at vaccines, there are hundreds of trials happening all over the world. So collecting this information is just not humanly possible, and that's where we ended up using AI. So without spending a whole lot of time going through this, but I really encourage you guys to spend some time and understand how this particular global pandemic is really driving the innovation across the world, and we'll have this URL available for us on our Garje Marathi team, for Garje Marathi team members. Okay. So moving on, we're going to talk about few of the other techniques that we came across. I'm also doing a little bit of time check, guys. So
can you also get back to the screen sharing? I mean, get back to the show.
Sure. Is it working, Anita, now?
No, we are again seeing your presentation.
Without machine. 16, I what?
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you, Anita. There are multiple solutions where I can spend a whole lot of time kind of talking about antibody and potentially how different details in the antibody and antigen reactions can be predicted by using AI/ML techniques. But at very high level, you will see that this is one of the features that really was used by Moderna and others to come up with the right protein structure which got identified as part of the vaccine. There's another technique called de novo drug design and development cycle, through which a lot of three-dimensional features, different specific properties of fragments of carbon, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, at a very molecular level, details get converted into what they call fingerprints, which are much easier to be consumed by computers and AI techniques. And all of that information is really important to understand the efficacy, safety of the drug, along with the developability of a particular medicine. So all of these interactions are captured through what is called a de novo technique. in just the interest of time, I'm skipping a few other things. The other thing that's really gaining traction is understanding the pathways. So I'm going to highlight some of the traditional ways and some of the newer ways how things are changing. So traditionally, we have a lot of chemistry, chemists and biologists. We used to do a lot of kinetic modeling and reaction modeling based on which we used to say what reaction output is going to come out. But now we have very advanced instruments, and these instruments spit, multi-gigabytes of data, and we can use that information from a lot of omics data, which is proteomics, metabolomics, to build and predict the kind of reactions that are happening in a particular pathways. So a lot of this innovation is driven purely based on the data that is being made available and the tools and techniques that are getting built, not only for the pharma world, but in the consumer world. And those techniques we are bringing forward for life-saving treatments and cures. Some quick examples of, once the drug is identified, what are the techniques that are used in the development processes? Something called QSR, which is qualitative structural activity relationship analysis. What it simply means is there are molecules which have very specific descriptors in terms of number of atoms, number of bonds, what kind of bonds they are, the structural properties of those, and how they reflect into biological and chemical activity. And that's really impacts the toxicity, the safety, and efficacy. There are certain techniques, and here also, traditional QSR analysis was simply done through different simulations and reaction-based, but there are newer techniques are making available because we have now completely a large set of data being made available through research literature, a lot of public data sets. So there's a tremendous amount of effort in the world going around for sharing data sets through research labs, common nonprofit organizations, and some of the experimental data and patents data. When this curated data is available for us, there are much better ways to develop the right selection of molecules, and the shortlisted molecules can be selected for further analysis in the lab work. And there are techniques, again, going back to natural language processing, machine learning models, as well as a lot of deep learning as well. I'm going to skip a couple of slides. There are things that we have done in the past where a basic reaction like Suzuki reaction, probably most of us have studied this in the chemistry, and it's one of the basic biopharma reaction, which is used in development sciences, can be optimized with a lot of data availability using AI/ML models, and how metal ligands can really expedite with the right kind of catalyst bringing on board, and then how can we reduce the cost, effect, and improve the yields of the reactions through various techniques. But in order for you to do that, there's a lot of data that gets collected, and the collection of data through patents and things like that needs tremendous amount of AI capability. So just to kind of give a little bit of reference architecture of this more technical side, but I'm sure there are some technocrats also participating. This might give you an idea in terms of the complexity of data preparation, and AI and ML is completely based on availability of clean and tagged data. So it's not easy, but there are techniques and accelerators within those techniques which can help expedite collection of this data. Kind of moving on, safety and toxicity is another important topic. So I'm going to come back to this particular one with Nilima with this help. So I'm going to skip this quickly in the spirit of time. Now, very briefly, I'm going to share some of my experience in terms of some of the large biopharma and as well as some of the startup biotechs who are facing this challenge. So and I've kind of broken this challenge into 3 buckets. One important bucket is really organization culture. It has to be really changed in each and every individual needs to be really made data savvy. And there are a lot of processes which support collection of data. And that needs to be really streamlined. Everybody needs to be aware that data is gold. But we all know that scientists never likes to be told how to do an experiment and how to document it. Most of the scientists are really expert in their field. So, building the awareness and culture with those scientists is an important part, is what we notice. The second piece is the complexity of this particular problem is such that you really need to have a real strong technology strategy. And I'm going to bring Bhushan from UK to talk about it towards the end, about how this complexity is important. And the scientific computational needs really are a little bit different compared to some of the consumer side of the technology. And then lastly, democratization of data or information, of the scientific information. So the large biotech and pharma companies are really working in silos, and breaking these silos across the different organizations are extremely important piece in solving at organization level. The second important aspect is really about AI/ML methodology is really different than a lot of the traditional technology build processes. So, and understanding the real nature of the AI/ML techniques is important. It's not going to give you 100% solution. It's always going to be probabilistic, and it is really helping you enable the right selection for the next step with a certain level of confidence, and people need to be aware of that. And it's a continuous learning cycle. So what happens for step one, and how the amount of data that gets fed in step one is going to change your step 5 potentially, because you've learned something completely new, like any human being. So it's a very continuous learning cycle, and a lot of organizations don't understand this important aspect. They acknowledge it, but putting that in practice is not that easy. Lastly, what we notice is, the processes underlying building this technology to support the right level of innovation is extremely important. So we always talk about delivering innovation through Center of Excellence, where there's a complete consistency of different projects. So this is what typically we walk through for large enterprises in terms of building the right processes, supporting the technology enablement, and with the right people. Lastly, I'm going to touch upon some key industry challenges. We all know that this particular field really needs a combination of a real good computer science and biology and chemistry background. There are just pure lack of skills in the industry right now, and bringing a lot of these folks and educating them, there's not good curriculum or really good forum. So I think one of the things, Anita, you referred earlier, really a lot of mentorship is really needed, and a lot of these employees are truly looking for people who understand both sides. And if you are able to really help our students prepare for this, there's a tremendous opportunity for them. The other real big challenge is really a lot of AI/ML techniques needs clean and pure data. And there are, not a whole lot of labs have those systems in place to capture the right amount of data during the experimentation. The other important aspect here is, even though when we publish certain things in literature or in the lab, we always are publishing very positive results. And AI not necessarily is really looking for all the time positive results. It needs to learn from some failures. Lastly, it's a very IP-driven industry. So the data is very, very much protected. Hence, the learning is slowed down. So, but there are a lot of attempts in the industry to solve that. And lastly, it's a very regulated industry. So that means some of the regulations need to catch up with what's happening in the technology world. But we are seeing, some of those things being brought and acknowledged by regulators like FDA, where they released on completely app-based treatments and things like that, as well as some of the new GMP guidelines for biologics with automated monitoring and testing and typically a continuous reactors and things of that nature. So with that, I think, I want to go back, Anita, to bring our some of the folks who are also expert in this particular space. And let me start with inviting Neelam Vaidya to talk about the ADME properties and how her experience and expertise is helping in terms of interactions with clients. Neelam, I'll invite you to share your experience.